Ohio deserves the best start and a lifelong of happiness and safety and security, education, all of the things that we know go into making a child a whole and healthy child, and then, of course, a whole and healthy adult. We were going to be joined this afternoon by our Vice Chair, Senator Sykes, but he is detained right now in our Senate Finance Committee, listening to a number of topics that relate to children. So I'm going to kick this off and say thank you to Senator Sykes for the work that he's doing on the budget, and turn this over to Rep. Russo to hear from her about today's topics and discussions. Thanks so much, and thanks, Rep. Russo.
Thank you, Senator Kunze. I appreciate you being able to hop on. I know it's busy times over in the Senate right now as they deliberate the budget. So welcome everyone to our Children's Caucus meeting. I'm really excited about our conversation today, where we're going to be talking about what are some of the opportunities in Ohio's budget to strengthen children's services, and especially to give voice for children who are in foster care. This topic is timely not only because we are discussing the budget right now, and we're still debating the budget. Right now it's over in the Senate, but it's also May is National Foster Youth Awareness Month. And as we continue to deliberate that budget in the Senate, it's critical that our state maintains the landmark investments in children's services from the last biennial budget, while also rising to the many challenges of this moment for youth in or aging out of our foster care system. House Bill 110, which is the budget bill, is an opportunity to strengthen, stabilize, and transform children's services to ensure that every child grows up in a safe and stable and permanent family. It's also an opportunity for Ohio to give children in foster care more voice, which is so critical, to protect their rights and to safeguard their ability to have someone to call who will listen to and advocate for them by establishing an independent youth ombudsman office. So we are very grateful today to be having this conversation, to be learning about more key opportunities in the state budget to improve the livelihoods of Ohio's children throughout the state. So I'm going to kick this off by just giving a quick shout out to each of our panelists, and then we're going to start with Scott Britton, who is with Public Children's Services Association of Ohio. We also have Kim Eckhart, who's with us from the Children's Defense Fund, and very excited as well to have Charmian Genet, who is with Action Ohio. So they are each going to spend, I think, about 5 or 10 minutes talking about some of the pieces and components of this conversation that we've asked them to cover. And then we will open it up to questions from either our audience members. You can put those in the chat, as well as some of our legislators who I know have joined, or some of our legislative aides. So I'm going to start with Scott Britton. Thank you, Scott, for joining us. Again, Scott is with Public Children's Services Association of Ohio.
Well, thank you, Representative Russo, and thanks to Senator Kunze as well. We really appreciate your leadership of the Children's Caucus and the opportunity for us to be here today. Public Children's Services Association of Ohio is the membership association of the county children's services agencies. We work for safe children, stable families, and supportive communities. And we know that both Representative Russo and Senator Kunze and all of the Children's Caucus are champions for children, and we appreciate their work on this budget. It's really a pivotal time for Ohio's children's services system. Federal and state policy changes go into effect in the next biennial budget, and Ohio has to get this transformation right, which means we need to align new policy requirements with new local resources. My job is to take you on a really quick overview of what's in the budget and help you understand why these new investments are needed. And I'm just going to be covering very quickly lines 600, 523, 450, and the TANF budget. So on the next slide, you'll see that Many of the investments that were made by Governor DeWine and the General Assembly last time around for this current budget that we were in were maintained, and we are so very grateful for that. They were historic new investments in a system that had long been neglected by Ohio, and they were intended to stabilize our system from years of the workforce crisis, of the addiction epidemic, and many more challenges. Those investments weren't really meant to transform our system, though. And so we'll be talking a little bit about the need for transformation in just a minute. But you'll see on this list, I just want to kind of call out that the increases that were mentioned in the executive budget showed something like a 58% increase in children's services. There was a sort of an issue around reporting what was invested versus what was reallocated after the pandemic. And what we really saw was a kind of a 14% increase in children's services due to the new Kinship support program. But we are supportive of all of these new investments, and we're very appreciative that they continued. In the next slide, you'll see that the new investments that primarily account for that 14% increase are the new Kinship support program, which I could talk about later if need be, along with some supports for our Ohio Youth Advisory Board and Chafee Young Adults, a real focus on youth in transition. And then there were some changes made to a couple of those new investments from the last time around. They're not going out according to allocation as they did in this budget year. And so that is one of the changes I wanted to draw your attention to. On the next slide, on line 450, you can see some new investments that have some very defined policy changes, many of which came out of the Governor's Ohio Children's Services Transformation Advisory Council. There's the Ombuds program that is the topic for conversation today, along with expansion of Wendy's Wonderful Kids, a plan for a kinship guardianship assistance program in the second year of the biennium, some prevention services and regional work, along with support for other recommendations that came out of that transformation advisory report. And PCSAO is supportive of all of those recommendations. And so we appreciate that the administration included those and that they were supported by the House. On the next slide, the TANF budget also includes some important investments for children's services, including independent living, the Ohio Children's Trust Fund, which is charged with prevention, and the Fatherhood Commission. I do want to give a shout out to the Ohio House for partially restoring the Kinship Caregiver program, which had been zeroed out. That's at $10 million per year, and we are very grateful to the House for restoring that. On the next slide, you'll see that the budget for children's services efforts is really quite positive, but all of the new investments that are included in this budget are really at the state level for statewide programming and special initiatives. Those kinds of programs matter, and we are supportive of them, but we know that counties are going to experience a $10 million reduction in allocations around foster care, foster parent recruitment and best practices funding that won't go out under the formula anymore, along with some losses, the $5 million loss in the TANF Kinship Caregiver program. And furthermore, the new Kinship support program and the transformational changes under Family First Prevention Services Act will also mean more costs at the local level. And so we're very concerned about that. On the next slide, you can see that all of this is coming at a time when our caseloads continue to go up. We did see a drop during the pandemic, but that trend line is definitely on the increase. We see our placement costs skyrocketing, really, with huge increases over the years. And I think our children's services funding from the state, while it has increased significantly in this budget, still remains very low, and particularly when compared to other states. So we're grateful for these investments, but we know that if we're really going to change the system, we need transformation. We greatly need that transformation. New policy requirements that I mentioned around kinship supports and family first have to be aligned with new resources for county agencies to ensure that kids can remain safely with their families and that children can be placed in the most appropriate setting and that the most effective services can be provided to reduce trauma in children's lives. So really, you'll see on the next slide, that's why PCSAO has joined with the County Commissioners Association of Ohio in requesting a $50 million increase in the state child protection allocation. That is really the only source of state funding for county children's services agencies by allocation. And that funding is needed to meet current needs, to support kinship caregivers under the new kinship support program, and to really lay the groundwork for transforming our system under this amazing opportunity of the Family First Act. So I've probably hit my 5-minute mark. I just want to say thank you again for this opportunity, and I'd be happy to answer any questions later in the program.
Thank you so much, Scott. And we are going to hold questions until the very end. I see we've got a little bit of chat that's going on in the chat box, so we'll try to get to those as well. Next, we have Kim Eckhart, who is with the Children's Defense Fund of Ohio. She is the manager for the Kids Count project, and she's going to give us a little bit of context and overview of the specific request in the budget to create the Youth Ombudsman program and office, and what's the reasoning behind that, and give us more input on the context for that. So thank you, Kim, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I really do echo what Scott said. Just appreciate the leadership here. So Youth Ombudsman Office, and we're also going to touch on a little bit on the Foster Youth Bill of Rights, because those two things really go hand in hand. And I do want to talk about, just a review of current legislative opportunities and amendments that are on the table. So if we can go to the next slide. At first, I just want to give a real high level, what is the office for? And so, we've mentioned that this is really about youth voice and really giving the youth themselves an opportunity and empowering them to be able to self-report when abuse or any kind of rights violations might happen while they're in some type of care, whether it be foster, kinship, congregate care, group homes. This Ombuds Office is not intended to necessarily replace the entire child welfare system, but when there are occasions when the system is not working properly, we need to have a secondary outlet. Youth need to have someone who can listen to them, to investigate their concerns and really take them seriously. And so this office really is about protecting children and giving them a voice. So especially without fear of retribution, I've been working really closely with a lot of young people, both currently in foster care, but also people who have had experience and are now adults. And I'm excited to welcome another person to speak after me who can talk more persuasively about the need than I can. But what they say is that they need to have a voice without a fear of retribution. And so that's what this office will do. And we really believe that if this office is working effectively, it will reduce the risk of running away and all the downstream implications of what that does for a young person's life. And it also adds capacity. So if a caseworker is not able to do a full investigation around a complaint that a young person brings to them, they can go to this office and really do the due diligence that's necessary. Next slide. So what makes an office effective? What is it that the youth themselves are? I am so privileged to have the opportunity to speak on their behalf, but what they have been telling me over and over in the work that they've done over the last 2 or 3 years to really articulate their vision for this is to tell us that it needs to be independent and autonomous. The U.S. Ombudsman Association has defined independence as an essential characteristic. It basically allows you to avoid any conflicts of interest. So basically taking the funding source out of the office where you're going to be doing maybe uncovering some things, that making recommendations, etc. So this really allowing it to be independent and autonomous is a key component. The next thing is that it's dedicated to youth. And we have heard from foster caregivers as well that there are issues from their perspective and they need someone too. But the fact of the matter is they're adults and they have other avenues already, simply by the fact of being adults. Youth really need this to be specifically geared towards them and the kinds of practices and delivery service that will meet their needs. And so that's why we really want both, because it could potentially be a conflict of interest if a foster caregiver is coming to an office and then the foster child, you know, both of them are coming to the same office. There could be a conflict there, but also we really want it to be, the culture of it is dedicated to youth themselves, to empower them. And then finally, what better way to do that than to really design it by current and former foster youth. So those people with lived experience in the system would be instrumental in the implementation of at every stage. And so that's really what we're asking for through some legislative work. So next slide. So where are we right now with all of this work that we've been doing? In the executive budget, we were so thrilled to see that Governor DeWine had committed $1 million over the biennium to create an ombuds office. And in fact, there's also legislation included for a foster youth Bill of Rights, which we see those two things as kind of going hand in hand. You need that foundation of the Bill of Rights in order to be able to do an investigation and determine if the youth's rights have been violated. We were excited about it. However, the caveat is that it's, as Scott mentioned, it is underneath, it's kind of held within implicitly in the JFS program operations budget. And the problem with that is that we see that as sort of, it doesn't necessarily get to that independent and autonomous, what we're trying to go for. So what we've had an amendment drafted, SC 3398, which would allow that to be a separate appropriation line item. That gives the legislature the opportunity to really clarify specifically that this ombuds office should exist. And it's not at the discretion of the director of JFS. If priorities change, you know, it really would be called out explicitly. And so that's the lowest hanging fruit. And we would love to see that be included in the Senate version. The other piece is that, you know, how can we fully make this autonomous and independent? Where would it live? You know, we've talked to a lot of people about this, and ultimately what we've kind of landed on is that similar to other organizations, like I personally used to work for the Ohio Air Quality Development Authority, which is an independent commission that oversees the Clean Air Act and how that, you know, implementing an effective tool for, in that case, small businesses to have a voice in an ombuds program. This is similar. We would love to see a commission appointed by members of the legislature, the governor, people with lived experience, people who have been children in the system. So that's really what we're asking for, is that this office be established under an independent and autonomous organization. And so that's another amendment. So there's kind of two to choose from. Hopefully both will be complementary. And we would also, you know, really love to highlight and applaud Representative Manchester's efforts, as well as Representative Plummer, to amend House Bill 4 to include language around a child welfare ombuds office. And so I see that, you know, we testified about that, and we see we would like it to be more robust and to be kind of helping us to identify the need for youth specific to be served and also to be independent and autonomous. And I guess the way I've been thinking about this more recently is those two things can be complementary, because there does need to be an office for caregivers, you know, and that could be housed within JFS. What we're asking for is that there also be one that's specifically dedicated to youth. I'm going to pause there because I want to give enough time for Charmian, who is going to be able to tell you in much more, you know, persuasively why we think this office is so important. Thank you.
Kim, for that. And I do just want to give a quick shout out to one of our vice chairs for the Children's Caucus, Representative Manchester, who I see is actually joined on today as well. You mentioned her House Bill 4. So we thank her for her work in the leadership of the Children's Caucus. And next, I'm very pleased to introduce Charmian Janae, who is going to talk to us. She is from Action, Ohio, and talk about, give really a personal perspective from foster youth who've aged out of the system, and would love to hear from her. So thank you for joining us, Charmian.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I just want to thank you guys for giving me this opportunity to provide my testimony in support of the provisions for foster youth in House Bill 110. My name is Sharmian Janae. I am a college graduate. I am a mother and I am a model. I come before you today to tell you my story, and within doing so, you will see why the Ombudsman's Office is so essential for foster youth today. My story begins January 19th, 1995, when I was born a crack baby. The doctors didn't think that I would be able to walk, talk, or function properly. I was born a child of the system. While my parents were in jail on drug-related charges, my siblings and I were placed with friends of the family, and 5 of us went into that home, but sadly, only 4 of us came out of that home alive. My sister did not come out of the house alive. She was beaten to death by the friends of the family that we were taken in by, that was known to the legal system. And I truly believe that if the Ombudsman's Office was set in place, that my sister would be alive and here today. She would be alive to be the maid of honor in my wedding. She would be an aunt to my babies, and she would have been my best friend, and she would be here to be my guide. After this placement, we were placed in kinship care, where we faced more trauma and tragedy. We were abused and starved to the point where my brothers had to dumpster dive to get us food. When someone finally did intervene, and we always wondered where our caseworker was and why she didn't come back to save us. When someone did finally intervene, we were so malnourished that it took many months to get us back to normal health. But we always wondered why our caseworker never came back, and if it was because they thought, well, they're with family, so they're okay. After that, we went back into the system, and we faced more tragedy with some of the homes that we were placed into. And I reported the abuse happening in the homes to my caseworker, and my caseworker confronted the family. But I found that I was the one, after they were found not guilty, and after the caseworker had did her assessment of trying to figure out what was going on, I was the one left with the retaliation from speaking up. So from then on, I feared speaking up because I knew that something bad would happen if I did. I was eventually adopted, and I was so happy. I was so excited. I thought I had finally found a family. I thought I had finally found love, protection, stability, everything that a child would hope for. These families that are adopting, sometimes they seem great in person and they seem great on paper and they meet all the check marks, but in real life, some of these families can be a nightmare. No caseworker ever came to check back on me, but I finally found the strength to speak up to some of my friends, to tell them of some of the abuse that was taking place in my adopted home. On some of the occasions, my friends saw for themselves what was going on. And I know that since I found the strength to tell my friends about what was going on, I know that if there had been an ombudsman's office, I would have found the strength to tell them as well. I would have had support. I would have had another safe place and an office that would have essentially saved my life. I often think back and wish that there had been another former foster youth who had came my way and let me know that there was a light at the end of the tunnel and that it was going to get better. I really feel like that would have saved me from a lot of the mental turmoil that I faced from all the trauma that I had went through. And for this reason, I recommend that the Ombudsman Office be designed by current and former foster youth who can help implement practices like hiring those who have lived experiences. This office is not intended to replace the entire system, but to be another avenue for youth who feel trapped like I did. Thank you so much for your time, and I will defer to my co-panelists before taking questions.
Well, thank you. First, I would like to say to you, Charmaine, thank you so much for sharing your very powerful story, and you know, just inspired by the strength that you have shown, and your ability to overcome and really accomplish so much, and also be an advocate for other foster youth. So thank you for that, and for being here today to share that. I do want to open it up to our legislators. Feel free to take yourself off mute to ask questions. I've got a couple of my own questions, but I want to make sure that my colleagues who are on, that they have a chance to ask their questions first. So feel free to take yourself off mute. All right, well, while you're thinking about your questions, I do want to throw out to the group, you know, we've had a lot of conversation. I sat through many of the budget discussions in my role in the subcommittee for Health and Human Services. You know, talking about this Children's Services Ombudsman program that I believe came out of the governor's task force last year or 2 years ago on foster care. And so the question was raised from the recommendation that came from that task force. What was maybe the decision of not necessarily going a step further to specifically call out the importance of a youth ombudsman that is maybe as part of the same program, but separate, so that our youth have an opportunity for their own individual advocate. Can you kind of talk about what you know that sort of went into that thought process, or was that part of the discussion from the task force when they made or had those meetings and made those recommendations?
I can take a first stab. So, you know, another member of Action Ohio who has been to offer testimony, you know, she was the kind of a former foster youth who was appointed by the governor to serve on the Transformation Advisory Council. And so I think when you know, there were a lot of people offering testimony. And so you could see that there was definitely a strong voice of kind of the foster caregiver community who recognized a lot of different ways that that they needed to have an office like this. On the other hand, you know, people like, I'll reference Juliana Barton, she's the woman who was appointed by the governor. You know, she was saying that this really needs to happen for youth. Now, I can't speak on behalf of, you know, the decision of the whole council, but I know that they're both strong advocates, and they're both definitely have their, you know, individual reasons for needing this office. I think with from the perspective of the youth, which is you know, the people that I feel like I really want to be a voice for the youth today. It really is about when a office caters to, when it's more general, it seems like it tends to cater to adults. If you go to like a website from another ombuds office, you'll see that like sometimes they use words like clients to refer to the children. And it's just not a very, like, you can imagine like somebody trying to figure out how to navigate this as a young person. That's not necessarily the language that they're going to respond to. That's just one example. You know, other examples are you have to print and fax a form in order to have your, you know, officially recognized and initiate an investigation. So things like that are the kinds of practices where we're like, how can we ensure that this is a tool, something that youth will actually respond well to and feel safe going to?
Thank you. That's helpful. I don't know if any of our other panelists have anything to add to that.
I do not.
Right.
I would just
You
add,
said it perfectly.
You did, Kim, and I appreciate that. I would just add that, I think the Children's Services Transformation recommendations, like many such recommendations, were fairly general in nature, and the goal is to kind of identify the specifics of it in usually a rulemaking process or something like that. I think that the goal that came out of that process that I heard was just to ensure the establishment of a neutral program that could serve everybody in the system.
Great, thank you for that context. Again, if any of our legislators on or legislative aides have questions, feel free to hop on and ask your question. Well, if we don't have anything, there are a couple of comments and questions in the chat. I want to make sure that we get to some of these. So Scott, this question is specifically for you. You had talked about the $50 million request in the budget for children's services, really to help those county agencies implement both federal legislation as well as the Kinship Care Program. Can you talk a little bit about what is, and from my understanding, when we passed House Bill 110 out of the House, it did not include that $50 million request, but what is the risk, what is at risk if no additional funds are dedicated to local children's services agencies?
That's a great question. I think the risk is that we have a once in a generation opportunity under the Family First Act to really change the way we serve families and children and improve outcomes for them. Family First changes decades of federal funding incentives to remove children from foster care. Now it will open up funding to allow us to provide prevention programs that keep children in the home and serve the entire family. At the same time, it makes changes that will restrict how many children can be placed in congregate care settings or residential treatment centers. And that's good policy, but in Ohio, we're giving facilities an extra 3 years until October of 2024 to step up to the new high quality standards for residential facilities. And while many of them will meet the deadline of October 1st of this year when Family First goes live, we know that many won't, and that will transfer a lot of new additional costs with no federal reimbursement to our county agencies. Similarly, under the Kinship Support Program, we want to work with Kinship caregivers to push them through the foster care licensing process. We know that process is a lot easier under Family First, and we're hopeful that more Kinship caregivers will become licensed. But that then transfers the responsibility for paying those foster care per diems to children's services agencies. More placement costs is really the name of the game with all of these changes coming down, and even our levy-funded counties right now are struggling to pay those placement costs. They're going back to county commissioners, asking for more local dollars to help them cover those costs. And I think that's why the County Commissioners Association of Ohio is partnering with us in this ask, because we want to transform the system. We want to improve outcomes, but in order to do it, we're going to need some additional transformational funding upfront to help us kind of flip the system.
Scott, you also bring up a great point. We've had a lot of discussions, and for those people who are joining, maybe a little bit newer to this topic, about the importance of, where children are placed. Obviously, when they can stay with their parents, that is good. The next best thing would be with their relatives, people who are related to them. And we know as they get further into the system, their outcomes really are not as great long-term. But part of that conversation is also what are the financial resources that are available to relatives, to those kinship care providers to make that even possible. There was a great article this weekend, I think in the Columbus Dispatch, about, it was specifically talking about the Mikaya Bryant case, and that it was really a potential case where a relative may have not been able to keep custody of Mikaya and her siblings because of the financial constraints and not having access to some of the financial supports, which eventually led to being in the foster care system. So can you talk a little bit about that piece of it? Because I think that goes into what you talked about, the $50 million. We've passed legislation for kinship care, but having that financial component to it, and Rep. Manchester and I also have a bill right now that just passed out of committee, making sure that child support even follows the child, even when they're with a third-party caretaker, because that's part of this conversation as well. Can you talk, any of you talk about that importance, really what families and kinship caregivers face from a financial perspective and how challenging it can be to get them those financial resources?
Yeah, I'd be happy to start and then pass it on. I think that you're absolutely right, Representative Russo, that removing children from their home is very traumatic. It can be as traumatic or more traumatic than the abuse they sustained itself. But if we can move them into kinship care with family, and Charmian told a very different story, and I certainly recognize that it's not always the best placement, but typically the research shows that kids get better outcomes long-term if they're placed with kin rather than in stranger foster care. And historically, we haven't provided that level of foster care per diem support to kinship caregivers. Certainly, there are a number of statewide programs available. We've got the TANF Child Only program. We've got the Kinship Caregiver TANF allocation that I spoke about during my presentation. We've got the Kinship Permanency Incentive Program, as well as Medicaid supports and SNAP supports for families who qualify. And then there are counties, including Franklin and Lucas and Hamilton, that provide their own monthly kinship stipends to kin caregivers. But those tend to be the better resourced counties that can do that. And so I would say that the new kinship support program aims to provide a modest stipend to kinship caregivers for the children in their care if they are in the custody of Children's Services. And that's a really important point to make. But then give them 9 months initially, but ongoing about 6 months to move through that licensing process so they can then qualify for the foster care per diem, which is much larger.
Thank you for that, Kim. I don't know if you had anything else that you wanted to add to that as well.
Yeah, no, it's very well said, Scott. And I think you're right. When we hear stories of children who didn't have a positive experience with family reunification or with kinship placement, we have to understand that there's a tension here between putting family above child safety, and so we just have to be very careful. And one reason why I think this Youth Ombuds Office is so important is by empowering youth themselves they are the experts on their own situation, and really elevating their voice and giving them the tools that they need to advocate for themselves. And, providing just more, I love programs like the CASA Gal program, where you have, more people who are standing up and being advocates for children so that wherever they're placed, their voice is being heard. And so, yes, I agree, like the providing more, of those kinship navigator tools to help families who really, are providing the best level of care that they can, giving them those resources, absolutely, I think is wonderful. It has to be combined with empowering youth as well, is what I would say. I'd love to hear Charmian's thoughts on this too.
Yes, I definitely agree with what you said, Kim. One thing I found is I did not know that my parents who adopted me got money for me. I did not know that. So more, like you said, educating on the kinship care, because I wish I would have known that I did have money coming my way and I could have saved that up to go to college or do something. But that money was not, I did not see that money. I had to start working at a very young age to provide for myself school lunches, for school books and all kinds of stuff. So I did not know that there's any of those programs or any type of money or anything set aside for me that was specifically for me in my care. I didn't know that. So just educating former fosters and using our lived experiences so we know that, hey, you do have money set aside specifically for you. There's different things you can do with it, college, all kinds of different things, whatever you choose. Like, I wish I would have known that because I didn't know.
And two other things that are worth mentioning that are in the budget are a foster youth bill of rights and a foster caregiver bill of rights. So those things are also in progress under this this transformational advisory set of recommendations.
Yeah, thank you for restating that. Those are two very important components. You know, we had a question in the chat as well about, you know, maybe Scott or Kim, if there are specific pieces of legislation, if you happen to know the bill numbers, that's great. I'm actually terrible about remembering even my own bill numbers. But if there are specific pieces of legislation that you think that advocates need to be aware of and reaching out to their legislators. Many of us who are here in this conversation today, either their own legislators or maybe legislators who are working on specific committees. Clearly, we've talked about the budget bill, which is House Bill 110. That is a big piece of policy that has many different components in it. But if there are a couple more that you want to call out, I think one of you had some in a slide that you presented, but if there are a couple of other things that pop up, I would be curious to hear what those are.
Yeah, the one that I mentioned, so yeah, of course, House Bill 110 is the budget bill. And, you know, we are advocating for specific amendments to be added to that so that we can, you know, have the funding for this ombudsman office to be explicitly identified. So that's one thing. And then the other piece is, and we've kind of had lots of conversations about this with a lot of different people. We've been knocking on a lot of doors. And so the second amendment really is, we would like to see it added to House Bill 110 if possible. I know the timeline is very short. In the next 2 weeks, basically, we're going to be wrapping that up. So if it doesn't happen in House Bill 110, we hope that we'll find some sponsors for a standalone bill. So, and the one that the other piece that we have, you know, testified about is House Bill 4, and it's a very broad bill. It has a lot of different really beneficial components for the foster care system in general. So, for example, it includes requiring law enforcement to communicate regularly with PCSAs, with public children's services agencies, so that there's ongoing communication about what's going on between those two agencies. So that's really important. The other thing that, and we, you know, again, we applaud Rep. Manchester for introducing a version of an ombuds office that we feel like makes very good strides, but we still would love to see it more robustly centered around youth and also explicitly kind of detailing the need for independence. So those are the two, House Bill 110 and House Bill 4 are the two big pieces of legislation currently that we're tracking, and you know, potentially more in the future. We'll see what happens as things unfold.
I would just add that, you know, PCSAO follows a lot of bills. One bill I think to keep your eye on is probably House Bill 289. It has to do with continuation of placement of children. I'm not saying it's a bill that we support everything in there, but as we saw with the Children's Services Transformation Advisory Council's regional forums and some ongoing conversation about the role of kinship caregivers and the role of foster caregivers and where these sort of best interests of children lie, That's a very subjective term, right? The best interest of a child could mean a very different thing for me if I'm a foster caregiver versus if I'm a biological parent of a child who's in the system. And so I think it's just important to acknowledge that these questions around children's services are often complex and they're fraught with a lot of emotions, and we need to make sure that we have kind of a full discussion and all these voices at the table, which is why I appreciate Charmian being here and Children's Defense Fund. We need more participation from biological parents and their voices in terms of their experience with the system. And we just need to kind of have an honest conversation about the complexity of these situations, because it's never easy when we're talking about child safety and what that means when we're pulling children away from everything they know and everything that they've been used to for their lives.
Well, thank you. I do want to give one last call for questions from our legislators who are on. I certainly don't want to not give you another opportunity. Oh, hello, Representative Smith. How are you?
Hey, doing well. My
Good.
earbuds in. I hope this works. I just wanted to acknowledge the importance of the idea of independence, and my hope that although it sounds like there's a good start that's been proposed in terms of providing ombudsman services for foster youth, I just want to say that, we see over and over that adults fail. Adults fail to report, adults fail to communicate what the child is experiencing. And I think that having something that allows the child to have a more direct voice to report what's going on and to be the focus, and to have adults who are centered on understanding what a child is trying to say just sounds so incredibly important to me. And I've learned so much today. I appreciate what Charmian has shared. Charmian, I'm incredibly sorry that your experiences have been what they were in the system, and the system really failed you, and you are still thriving anyway, obviously. And so I just want us to, I'm sorry, Charmian.
Oh, thank you.
You're just an incredible woman. So keep doing everything you're doing. Thank you for your advocacy. I've been informed and educated today, and I just want to help if I can, and push for what you're asking for and what so many people are asking for in terms of really truly independent, some sort of independent organization for folks like you to be able to report issues. That's all. Just underscoring and echoing some sentiments. Thank you, Rep. Russo.
Thank you, Representative Smith. I appreciate those comments. Anyone else before I give our panelist last word here? All right. So for our panelists, is there anything, just closing that you'd love to say? You know what? We do have one quick question that I may have missed, but the question was, when the Youth Bill of Rights was written, did youth with lived experience actually participate in that process to create that Youth Bill of Rights?
Well, as far as I understand it, so the Foster Youth Bill of Rights, as it stands, has not been created yet. The language in House Bill 110 simply states that through Ohio administrative rule, the Department of Job and Family Services will establish this Youth Bill of Rights. I do know that there have been conversations with youth, that there have been stakeholder meetings in order to get that level of feedback. So I think we're just kind of hoping and waiting for that constant kind of feedback loop where we can kind of see, well, what's happening now and what are the next steps in that process.
Yeah, I would just echo that. I think the bill language says that a Bill of Rights, both for foster youth and foster caregivers, should be written. And once that passes, I think the process will start. But you saw in the slide I shared that there is funding for including a youth voice in the process of the Department of Job and Family Services, and I suspect that process will be closely followed.
Excellent. Thank you for adding that. So any last comments from our panelists before we close it out?
Just thank you for having us today. I'd be happy to answer any other questions. I think I shared some links, and we appreciate the Children's Caucus for all of your advocacy and support for these important issues.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just say, it's been a real privilege for me to get to hear so many stories. So we've been, talking with youth, young people, and some people are, in their 30s and 40s now, but they're still doing this work because they consider the people who are coming up after them their brothers and sisters in care. And it's just such a privilege to see how passionately they care about this. I mean, working day and night on these issues. And so I feel privileged and humbled to kind of be in the place of using my voice on their behalf. And just interestingly, we were able to get some media recently, and we talked about this on the news. And I had a young woman call me. She found out, she just tracked us down through my title, and she said, I had that same experience, and I want to do something. What can I do? So I just feel like there's this wonderful community of people out there, and that if we can really create this office well, it will serve as another network. And like Charmian said, like the people who are kind of coming up through the system need to see that it's possible to thrive as an adult. And that level of kind of investment, I think, is really, just a wonderful addition to all of the great work that's happening in Ohio.
Charmian, any last words from you?
I just want to thank you guys so much for giving me the opportunity to tell my story, and just thank you for taking the time to care and to listen, and just thank you for everything.
Well, thank you, Charmian. I think you sharing your story has definitely been something that I will take away from this particular Children's Caucus meeting. So thank you for being willing to do that. So with that, we are going to close out today's meeting. Just as a reminder, we do record these sessions. They are available on our YouTube channel, as well as on our Children's Caucus website. You can access them. I believe we will be sending the slides out, as well as the link to the recording after this meeting for those who registered for today, and hope that you can join us next time that we meet, and for another great and very informative topic. So thank you all. Thank you to our panelists, Scott, Kim, and Charmian, for being here today, and to my colleagues who were able to jump on as well to join the conversation. Thank you.